So, although this is Evelyn's first time as a camper for junior high week.
Okay, we're live.
All righty, great. Well, good morning, all. Thank you for coming. I was asked again. You should have all gotten emails and seen Facebook messages and or posts and all sorts of things on it. But a reminder: Pastor Mark's retirement celebration is the last Sunday in July. Special music and stuff at the early service, and then after late service there'll be a lunch. And they want to make sure they have a count for lunch. Figure out if we need to rent a room in the union or something to fit everyone. But right, but all right. So again, we're looking at Sunday school stories that aren't covered in the lectionaries, and though it's a bit of a twist, the story of Zacchaeus appears in the lectionary, but it appears at a time when we never use it, because it appears towards the propers that are always at the end of October or beginning of November, and we always use Reformation and All Saints to trump whatever the lectionary would be following if we weren't celebrating those days. And so we don't ever get to hear the story of Zacchaeus in church, but of course we can sing the song, and the children love it. And yeah, all right. Zacchaeus, the wee little man who climbs up in a sycamore tree. All right. So again, he's a tax collector, and this is kind of what we think of a tax collector, right? Someone who works for the Internal Revenue Service, making sure that we're all paying our taxes, whether it's processing tax forms or answering questions about how to process tax forms, or going out and double checking and talking to people who didn't fill out their forms correctly. But really, when we're thinking of tax collectors in Jesus' day, there's a couple other spots, because it wasn't just, wasn't an income tax really. There tended to be kind of what we talk about more as tolls. So like someone sitting at a train station, or at a transit hub, who collects the money, the toll, the ticket for how you ride those things. Or someone at a toll booth on an interstate, on a tollway, who's collecting the taxes to the tolls in order to make sure that the roads are properly maintained. Or the people who double check and make sure that the trucks are carrying what they as much as they claim they're doing, and so the proper transit fees are paid as goods move from one place to another. That's more of kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about tax collectors in the Bible. And of course, since it's July 4th weekend, where we think of no taxation without representation as being one of those battle cries of why the American Revolution happened, and that was one of sometimes some of the grievances of the people under the Roman Empire too. But for the most part, the Roman Empire, as long as the money kept flowing into them, they didn't necessarily care. But they were using the money to build roads, maintain their army, keep the peace. And if they kept the peace, then all these goods were able to be traded and transported easily and more safely, and so people would gladly pay at least some of that. But again, one of the challenges that we see, with when things happen like the Stamp Act and all of those things that kind of led up to the American Revolution, one of the challenges, and part of why then they were hated, was because again it was these things that they were paying for that they didn't think they needed to pay for, that they weren't told to. But then the people collecting those things were seen as collaborators, as instead of being good American colonists, they were seen as working for the British. And again, initially that wasn't a problem, because all the colonies would think of themselves as at least part of the British Empire, and so of course they're going to do it. Then as that those identities started to divide, then those issues started coming up. All right. And so then tax collectors in Rome So the publicani, which is the Latin term, were wealthy men who paid for the privilege of collecting taxes in certain localities. You may recognize that word. That's how the King James Version then just kind of transliterated and used that word in talking about tax collectors in the King James Version. And so sometimes when we talk about some of these tax collectors or parables, that they're the Pharisee and the publican. This is what a publican is. There we go. Yeah. So they pay for the privilege of collecting taxes in certain localities. So I'm going to pay the Romans and say I want to be the guy who's collecting the taxes in Caesarea, or as we'll talk about with Zacchaeus in Jericho. So kind of the higher up, and so I'm going to pay this much to make sure that then I get appointed to do that, and then. Sometimes they were Romans, although again here Zacchaeus is described in that way. So he might have been well off that way too. Because Zacchaeus is described as a chief tax collector, not just an ordinary one. Then they'd employ the local Jews to do the actual work of collecting the taxes or tolls for them. So, so they'd be in control of things, but then they'd hire other people to do the actual collecting. And then the catch is, of course, that, so taxes levied by the Roman governments were many and varied. That hasn't changed, has it? First, poll tax had to be paid by every male over 14 and every female over 12. But if you were too old, you were exempt. The land tax, payable in kind. So I think it must have been, percentage of the harvest kind of thing. Both of these direct taxes were collected by Roman officials in Palestine. Then indirect tax charges made on all imports and exports, including the transportation of slaves. And those would have been collected by the tax collectors that we find in the Gospels. Examined goods and collected tolls on roads and bridges. Market toll in Jerusalem introduced by Herod. Oh, Jerusalem needs more money. Let's raise taxes. Or, hey, there's all this money flowing in the market. Let's get a piece of the action there. Make sure. Yeah, right. And so then as a class, the tax collectors were hated by their fellow Jews because they represented the foreign domination of Rome. So because it would be one thing if you were working for a Jewish king, collecting these things. I mean, we don't like paying taxes, even if, to our government anyway. But if we were paying, like the revolutionaries, if paying taxes to London, that is, on the other side of the ocean, that doesn't seem to be addressing our needs, that's where we get that. So the tax collectors, they were seen kind of as collaborators with this occupying Roman Empire. And again, methods were inquisitorial, so they needed their money. They didn't necessarily care how they got it, and they often overcharged people and pocketed the surplus, and that goes kind of up. Again, these publicani would pay off the Roman Empire, say, I need to be in charge of collecting taxes here. They needed to make up for that bribe somehow, and then everyone under them. Okay, as long as I get my cut, this is what I need. This is what I'm expecting from you. If anything above that, you get to keep. So.
You would think that the Romans would say, well, you're stirring up the people by cheating.
Well, and so that was the cat. You wanted they collected enough to make money, but yeah, once they got too into that, but also. It depends on which, as long as you're paying off the right official, they're going to be on the side of the tax collector, not the side of the people having the taxes collected from.
When you have your garbage hauled, who does that for you? Who does the garbage collecting? You set out your garbage can.
Yeah.
What?
It's a private company.
That's correct. I grew up in Baltimore County. Who took our trash? for Baltimore County, that was part of your property taxes.
Yep.
And that used to be far more widespread. What changed? Why did they get away from having the government do it and having private?
It's too costly.
Yes, the Romans knew that long ago. So they privatized as much as possible. They contracted out because it was much, much cheaper. Even with these bribes and stuff, much cheaper. The Romans were just practical. They didn't care about people's consciences.
All right. So the rabbis include tax collectors with robbers, and then again in the Gospels when we say, you almost can't stop yourself because when Jesus is eating with tax collectors and sinners, they're almost always kind of joined up that way. So this is how we're used to thinking with them. Again, shows the attitude of the Jewish people to these tax collectors. Again, renegades sold their services to the foreign oppressor to make money at the expense of their own countrymen. I'll show this again later too. This is from the Chosen, but this is Matthew working in his tax collecting booth. And note what's here. So there's I'm not 100% sure how accurate this is, but this at least gives us an idea of the expectations that if you have a tax collector, he's working behind a booth with iron bars behind it to protect him, and he's got a Roman soldier standing by him, and we see him escorting Matthew around too, because again, they know that he's not well liked, and it needs protection. Sometimes needs someone to help him enforce paying taxes. So.
How did they get the money? Was it currency? I assume it was some kind of currency that was having.
It would have been all the coins and stuff. That's part of why the coins were minted so that they would be able to be used to pay for taxes and things. So. All right, so here we go into Zacchaeus. Could someone read this for us?
Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was. But on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was small in stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled, he has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, since he is also a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost.
All right. Anything jump out at you with that story from looking at it, at the verse instead of just what you were remembering of what, from singing the song or watching your kids or grandkids sing the song?
Just seems like just being in the presence of the Lord, he felt sorry for all the things he had done.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and this repentance seems to, all he does is, Jesus says, I'm going to eat with you, and then suddenly then being in the presence of Jesus, that gets him to want to, turn his life around.
The fact that he was so insistent that he wanted to see him, though.
That he wants to see him so much that he runs and climbs the tree. But anything else?
So was Jesus there in Jericho?
Yeah.
So was it well known that Jesus was going to be passing by? Would that have been?
Apparently, this is towards the end of Jesus' ministry. In fact, this is one of the last things that happens in Luke before Palm Sunday, before Jesus gets to Jerusalem. So the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, kind of have take Jesus' ministry. They start him up in Galilee, and then he works his way geographically closer towards Jerusalem until they get there for Holy Week. John has Jesus moving around all the way. And because John has 3 cycles of festivals, that's why we think Jesus had a 3-year ministry. But so Matthew and Luke, they're not necessarily telling Jesus' ministry story chronologically, but they've arranged it geographically to make sense that way. But yeah, so this is happening towards the end of Jesus' ministry as he's getting close to Jerusalem. Would have been well known. And so for people wanting to crowd in and see him, Zacchaeus would have heard and decides to do something about it. All right, so we kind of see this too in the chapter before. We get a couple accounts of people doing similar things. First, we get the parable of the parable of the Pharisee and the publican, or Pharisee and the tax collector here, or you can look at the stained glass window behind Pastor Mark over there. But the Pharisee is the one who thank you, I'm not like any of these other sinners, especially that guy over there, and the publican, the tax collector, God have mercy on me, a sinner. Be merciful to me, a sinner. And then after that is the rich young man who talks to Jesus and then goes away sad because he's not willing to sell all his stuff. That seems to be what's keeping him from following Jesus. And then we get the story of Zacchaeus, who does. A few other things to note, and we talk about, so it's very demeaning for an honorable man to climb trees or run. We especially talk about that with the parable of the prodigal son, when the father runs to his son and who's coming back. That a Middle Eastern father would not have done that at all. Again, same here for Zacchaeus. We'd look at someone weird, a Wall Street banker or someone climbing a tree in a full suit. But it would be weird, but we wouldn't necessarily. We don't have the same honor shame stuff going on. But for them, it would have been really weird. Again, for him to run, and because again, if you're an important person, you don't need to run. Everyone else has to be on your time. And then climbing a tree, not something normally done. We got the chief tax collector, and this is the only use of this word in the New Testament. Every so often we get these fun words that, wait a minute, what does this mean? And but only use of chief tax collector in the New Testament here. So how does Zacchaeus prove that he is sincere in seeking peace for his soul? There's something bothering him that he needs to see Jesus for.
He's willing to part with his riches.
Part with his riches, right. Yeah, so he gives half his goods to the poor and restores fourfold those he defrauded, and that's what would have been the punishment had the rabbis given him a punishment for having done these things. So he's voluntarily doing what he would have supposed to. But yeah, so we see this. It's not just his words that I'm going to turn my life around. It's I'm going to turn my life around, and this is what I'm doing to prove that I'm turning my life around. All right. So why does Jesus not demand? Again, a rabbi could have told Zacchaeus, okay, you've been defrauding people. You need to pay them back fourfold. Jesus doesn't tell him that. Why does Jesus not demand that Zacchaeus gives up his wealth?
Doesn't mean the same when he wasn't.
Yeah. Doesn't, yeah. So, because again, just the chapter before, Jesus had told that rich young man, you need to give up your wealth in order to follow me. He doesn't tell Zacchaeus to do it, but Zacchaeus, out of gratitude and faith and newness of life and being now saved, but then that's how he shows it. Jesus didn't have to demand it. This is kind of a free response to it. In what way do we follow Zacchaeus' example? Or do we follow Zacchaeus' example? I mean, I know none of you are tax collectors, so.
I just remember a professor in landscape architecture that followed the Zacchaeus in a way.
Oh, yeah?
He taught some of his classes while he was sitting in a tree.
Oh, okay.
I really liked that class.
Yeah.
Hopefully we're not defrauding people.
Hopefully we're not defrauding people, right, yeah.
It's a voluntary thing.
Right. Mhm.
It's not a demand.
Like I can't remember whether it's on our offering envelopes this year or not. But, you know, God loves a cheerful giver. Make sure you stick that on your offering envelopes and stewardship to make sure that you're reminded that you are cheerful as you're giving, right? Right. Yeah. So again, based where this is, we also learn a few things from how Luke structured this. Again, this is right after the parable of shortly after the parable of the Pharisee and the publican. So we see Luke taking this group of tax collectors and kind of raising them up that have been seen as sinners, the worst of the worst, despised. No one likes them, and yet even they are included in this as followers of Jesus. The Jesus ministry is even for them. And then there's also kind of, again, I was mentioning this is towards the end of Jesus' ministry before he shortly before he gets to Jerusalem. Towards the beginning of Jesus' ministry, then, is another tax collector account, the calling of Levi or Matthew. And could someone read this for us?
After this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And leaving everything, he rose and followed him. And Levi made him a great feast in his house, and there was a large company of tax collectors and others reclining at table with them. And the Pharisees and their scribes grumbled at his disciples, saying, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" And Jesus answered them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." And they said to him, "The disciples of John fast often and offer prayers, and so do the disciples of the Pharisees, but yours eat and drink." And Jesus said to them, "Can you make wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in those days." He also told them a parable. No one tears a piece from a new garment and puts it on an old garment. If he does, he will tear the new, and the piece from the new will not match the old. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the new wine will burst the skins, and it will be spilled, and the skins will be destroyed. But new wine must be put into fresh wineskins.
All right. So, again, showed the picture earlier. Matthew in his tax collecting booth, which needs iron bars. He's got his Roman soldier to guard him and help, break kneecaps if needed to make sure people pay their taxes. So, and did you notice any similarities then, any parallels between what happens with Matthew and what happens with Zacchaeus?
Matthew welcomed him.
Right. Jesus calls him and welcomes him, and then Matthew throws a big feast and invites all these other people. But he invites the people he knows, who are also tax collectors and sinners.
The Pharisees did not like to lose their power.
No, they didn't.
And they were trying to impress on people that you don't want to follow Jesus. He's got those sinners following him.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Look at who he's hanging out with. Do you want to be with those people? Right. And again, you've got the ceremonial clean unclean part going on here, and too. Even more so than just kind of our peer pressure. Are you sure you want to be hanging out with those kind of people? But
Then you have to remember, the Pharisees might be to us the guys dressed in black and so forth, but you have to see how they were seen in those times. They were seen as good. They were what people wanted to be. So for Jesus to just give the time of day to these tax collectors was shocking.
Right.
Shocking.
Yeah, if you were a respectable Jew, you'd much more often, you'd much rather be with the Pharisees than with the tax collectors. And the fact that Jesus is doing the opposite is just kind of blowing people's minds. So. All right, what kind of self-image do you think Zacchaeus had? What do you think he thought about himself?
I thought he was doing pretty good for himself.
Okay, I mean, at least partly, yeah. I think, I've worked hard. I'm chief tax collector. Jericho's not it's not Jerusalem, but it's no, podunk, it's not Nazareth or, up in Galilee or anything. It's a decent sized town, probably, yeah, do pretty well off, has good crew working under him to do that, yeah. Anything else?
Was the Holy Spirit moving him to want to know more about Jesus? I mean,
There's something that, again, despite his wealth, despite his, his seeming power, he knows he must know there's something missing, and Jesus might be the one to help him figure out what that, fill that need,
He might have been rich, but what may have drawn him to be a tax collector? Simply greed. If you were going to be a tax collector, you could have money, but would it also mean for you as a person?
Ostracized by
Totally
Yeah, you're an
ostracized.
outcast.
So what type of people might be drawn to that?
People who didn't fit in.
Yeah, and what does it say about Zacchaeus? He was what? A wee little man.
He had short and
Already
sad,
an outcast, made fun of for being such a shrimp. So a lot of times the people who were tax collectors were people who had extremely low self-esteem. That's what we're drawn up to it.
One more thought on
Yeah.
Zacchaeus as a tax collector. I'm thinking has to be very good in mathematics.
Yep.
And very, you've paid your taxes, you've paid your,
Mhm.
very, very tuned in. So you
Right.
might be wealthy, you might want to be greedy,
Yep.
but he still had to be pretty smart and detailed.
Oh, yeah, definitely, right. Very, very
So they could.
analytical and might be like, what was it? They weren't bad. I did a wedding just a week ago. Groom in data science, bride works in accounts payable at Workiva. And so there were, some times when you could tell that's how they were both kind of thinking in spreadsheet. I do still remember, it's been a while, the bride was an accountant and her dad was a math teacher. And that was the most organized bride, 150-page binder of, minute by minute timeline, that kind of, really, really structured and organized, but then, you get stressed out when things aren't lining up exactly, how you've sketched them out and how you've planned them out. And again, probably if you're going to be a tax collector, that kind of like, who wants to work for the IRS? I don't think we've had anyone here. I still remember a Beta Sig who, when he came, he wanted to work for OSHA. And he had the mindset of someone who you think would want to work for OSHA. He was a great house manager for the Beta Sigs and made sure everything was checked off and everything. But his friends got frustrated with him at sometimes. We don't need to do all this. We can do this. No, we have to follow. Yeah. How did Jesus' view of Zacchaeus differ from the view most Jews had of a tax collector?
He saw him as a person.
Right, not just someone who wants my money, someone who's part of this nameless bureaucracy that's from Rome that's making my life more difficult, but no, a person. Yeah. Yeah. What attitudes of Zacchaeus prompted Jesus to be responsive to him?
He was willing to change.
Willing to change. So, and again, willing to, what is Zacchaeus? He runs and climbs a tree, which are not something that a, respectable person would have done. The fact that he's willing to do these things in order to get to see Jesus shows Jesus that there's something going on here. All right. And then kind of to wrap up and look at Zacchaeus' response, James 2:14, again, us Lutherans don't like. But what good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? And again, how does Zacchaeus fit into that text or follow that rule?
He's going to follow up his words with his actions.
Yeah, he doesn't just say, okay, I'm changing my life, I'm following. It's like, I am doing these specific, concrete ways. I'm giving away half my wealth. I'm repaying fourfold those I've defrauded. And again, this isn't just I'm saying I'm a new person, but if you looked at me, you're not going to notice a difference. There's going to be a difference. So. All right, what are some examples of restitution you've observed or practiced? Again, trying to make things right, which is what Zacchaeus said. Okay, in my old life I did these things. This is how I'm going to make it right. Are any examples of either you as a kid or when your kids or grandkids did something and okay, what do you have to do to fix this?
I don't remember any from me specifically, but Matt, when he was...
Of course, yeah, your brother, right, yeah, good.
When he was a kid and he was, I think Dad made him go scoop somebody's driveway of snow or whatever, and he kind of did a not great job. And Dad got word and he was like, oh no, and he made him go back and actually do it right.
Yep.
So you want us to admit that we...
What? I'll get Gordon to stop the live stream first, and then we can do that, right? I promise that the IRS is not watching this live stream. All right. Yeah, and then think to yourself, and in light of your faith in Christ, is what is there anything for which you need to make restitution? All right, so
I think that's one of the things that people don't realize. They waste time at work, for example. They're really cheating their company,
Yep.
and they need to be more aware of that, I think.
Oh, yeah. I can't remember where it was, but I've been reminded a couple times this summer about when I worked at my summer job in high school and college was working at Kmart. And someone would ask, when people would ask how many people work there, we'd answer about half. But yeah. No, yeah, I mean, we need to rest, but when we work, we work. Very good. So, all righty. Well, thank you very much. So I'm not here next week because I'm still at camp next Sunday. But see you in a couple. I'm trying to remember. Is it Tabitha next week or?
No.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll see you then.
Thank you.
Thank you.